There comes a point in every soul's journey where exhaustion becomes sacred. You have prayed until your words felt hollow, worked until your strength was threadbare, and hoped until even hope itself seemed a weight too heavy to carry. In that quiet exhaustion, when the world grows dim and all your efforts seem unanswered, heaven whispers, not in thunder, let in gentleness, "You've done enough. Let me handle it now." We are not the architects of every outcome. Yet, how fiercely we cling to control. As if our grip could command the tides, as if our striving could summon the dawn. We forget that there is a divine rhythm moving beneath all things, a will greater than ours weaving through the chaos, unseen yet unshakable. It is only when we come to the end of our own striving that we begin to see this truth. God does not ask for endless labor, he asks for surrender born of trust. The burden of always doing, fixing, and proving is one the soul was never meant to carry alone. Our hands tremble under its weight because they were made for worship, not for endless toil. Faith in its truest form is not the act of doing more. It is the grace of doing less when heaven commands you to rest. To cease your striving is not to fail, but to finally understand who truly governs the storm. The human heart often mistakes silence for absence and delay for denial. Why is nothing changing? While heaven answers, because I am still preparing what you cannot yet hold. There is divine activity in stillness. Like seeds buried deep in winter soil, unseen but alive with purpose. You think your prayers have vanished into the void, but every whispered plea has been caught, counted, and carried to a place where time itself bends to God's will. When heaven says, "Let me handle it," it is not a dismissal of your effort. It is the completion of it. It means your part has been faithfully done, your obedience noted, your perseverance seen. It means the weight you've carried has reached its holy transfer point. The invisible hands that formed galaxies now reach toward your burden, ready to lift it. But the divine exchange cannot happen while your fists remain clenched around what you think you must fix. Letting go is not weakness. It is to stand before the Creator and confess, "I am not you," and that is enough. The angels do not labor in panic, nor does heaven tremble at earthly uncertainty. The same voice that told the sea, "You may come this far and no farther," also speaks over your chaos, declaring boundaries where pain once had no end. Trust that voice now. There is a strange peace that arrives when the soul finally surrenders its need to understand. When you stop asking, "How will this work?" and start saying, "Thy will be done," something inside unclenches. You begin to feel the pulse of eternity, moving through your small moment of fear. You realize that the God who holds stars in his hands does not need your anxiety to guide him. He only asks for your faith. You have done enough. Not because you've run out of strength, but because the story has reached a chapter only heaven can write. Every step, every tear, every silent prayer has brought you here, to the edge of divine intervention. And now, the author takes the pen from your hand. Heaven is not telling you to give up. It is telling you to give over. The difference is everything. To give up is to surrender to despair. To give over is to surrender to purpose. You are not being abandoned. You are being invited into trust so deep that it no longer requires proof. So rest now. You have wrestled long enough with shadows that were never yours to fight alone. Let heaven handle what your human heart cannot, for in the stillness that follows surrender, you will discover that divine hands have already begun to move. Quietly, perfectly, and always on time. True faith begins where human striving ends. That is the line where the soul meets its truest test. not in moments of triumph, but in the surrender that follows exhaustion. We spend much of our lives believing that faith is measured by our effort, by how persistently we can pray, work, or hold things together. We push, plan, and press forward as though divine favor could be earned through sheer determination. Yet faith is not born in motion, it is revealed in stillness. It is only when the will grows weary and the mind stops wrestling that something higher has room to breathe through us. Human striving is rooted in the illusion of control. We think that if we can just do enough, say enough, or fix enough, everything broken will return to order. But faith begins in the moment that illusion shatters. It begins when the soul, worn thin by effort, realizes that it cannot save itself. The hand that once clenched in fear slowly opens, not to grasp, but to receive. And in that quiet yielding, heaven begins to move. There is a sacred exhaustion that precedes divine revelation. When your strength collapses, you are not failing, you are being invited to witness power that is not your own. The greatest spiritual awakenings rarely happen in the noise of activity, but in the silence that follows surrender. You cannot hear heaven's voice when your own plans fill the air. Faith is not the absence of effort, but the transformation of effort. It is when striving turns into trust. We learn this truth the hard way. We chase results, measure progress, and demand visible signs of divine movement. When none appear, we grow anxious, thinking perhaps we haven't done enough. But God does not need our frantic motion to prove our devotion. Sometimes, the greatest act of faith is to stop, to rest in the assurance that the unseen is already unfolding according to divine timing. When you have done all that you can, faith is the courage to stand still and let heaven finish what you began. Faith is not passive resignation. It is the quiet confidence that even when you step back, the story continues under higher authorship. The river still flows when you stop rowing. The dawn still comes when you stop watching the horizon. The universe moves on the breath of a creator who requires no assistance to sustain it. To believe this is to be free from the tyranny of your own striving. Many confuse business with belief. They think that to rest is to doubt, that to wait is to waste. But the waiting room of faith is not empty. It is filled with purpose invisible to the eye. The soil beneath a field looks lifeless after the plow, but in its hidden depth, roots are forming, life is being prepared. Faith looks barren at first glance, yet beneath the stillness, divine motion is always at work. When you cease your labor, heaven begins its own. True faith is not an act of the mind but of the heart. It does not demand evidence, it breathes in the unseen. It knows that outcomes are not the proof of God's presence. Trust is. The one who truly believes no longer measures progress by visible signs, for faith does not walk by sight. It walks in darkness, guided by a light the world cannot see. That light only appears when striving fades. There comes a sacred moment when all the things you tried to hold together begin to fall apart. You watch doors close, plans crumble, people drift away. You think you've failed. But in that unraveling, heaven whispers the truth you were too busy to hear. It was never your strength that sustained anything. What is meant for you is held not by effort, but by grace. The moment you release your need to manage everything, the divine begins to manage it for you. Faith is the quiet acknowledgement that the universe is not an accident, that nothing unfolds outside the wisdom of the one who sees beyond your sight. When you stop striving, you are not giving up. You are giving space for the miraculous. The walls you could not move by force may fall by faith alone. The prayers you whispered in frustration may already be answered in ways you cannot yet understand. It is a paradox of the spirit. Only those who surrender find strength. Only those who stop fighting the current learn to float upon it. True faith does not begin when you achieve control, but when you relinquish it. The hands that once clung to outcomes now rise in quiet trust, and in that gesture, heaven moves closer. You stop trying to prove your belief and begin to live it. You stop performing for divine approval and begin resting in divine assurance. You discover that what you could not earn by striving is freely given in surrender. Letting go is not weakness but worship. It is one of the hardest truths for the human heart to accept, because we are conditioned to equate control with strength. From the moment we begin to dream, we are taught to hold on tightly, to plans, to people, to outcomes. We believe that if we release our grip, everything will fall apart. Yet there is a sacred paradox at the center of spiritual life. It is only when we loosen our hold that divine hands can take over. Letting go is not a sign of failure. It is a declaration of faith. It is the soul's quiet confession that the Creator knows better than the creation. To let go is to bow before the unseen. It is to acknowledge that your understanding, no matter how wise or experienced, has limits, while divine wisdom has none. The act of surrender is not passive, it is an act of reverence. When you stop wrestling with what you cannot change, you are not quitting. You are honoring the one who can. True worship does not always look like song or prayer. Sometimes it looks like an open hand, trembling yet trusting, offering back what it once clutched in fear. The world glorifies control. It praises the one who never gives up, who always pushes through, who bends the world to their will. But heaven measures strength differently. In divine arithmetic, the strongest soul is the one that yields. The wind bends the tree that survives the storm, but the one that resists is broken. Letting go is that bending. It is humility shaped into obedience. The proud mind resists, but the surrendered heart bows and finds peace in doing so. There are seasons when you must act, fight, and persevere, but there are also moments when every door you knock on remains closed, when every path seems blocked no matter how much you try. Those moments are invitations to release, not reasons to despair. When your strength has reached its edge, heaven whispers that it's time to move from effort to trust. You let go, not because you no longer care, but because you finally understand that holding on was never the way to win. Letting go is not the absence of love. It is its highest form. To let go of something or someone is to stop trying to control their place in your life and instead allow them to belong to divine timing. You do not abandon what you love. You entrust it. You place it in hands far gentler and wiser than yours. That is worship in its purest expression, to love enough to surrender, to trust enough to release, to believe that what is meant will remain or return in its right form. The human mind clings to what feels safe, even when safety is an illusion. We hold on to plans long past their purpose, to relationships that no longer align, to fears that used to protect us but now imprison us. We cling because we fear the emptiness that follows release. But heaven cannot fill a hand that is already full. Every letting go is an act of clearing space for something greater. You do not lose when you release. You make room to receive. Letting go requires courage because it feels like stepping into uncertainty. You stand at the edge of what you know and take a step toward what you cannot see. That step is not weakness. It is sacred bravery. It is the courage to trust that the one who formed your path also walks beside you on it. When you release your need to control outcomes, you begin to witness divine orchestration at work. Situations begin to unfold in ways your effort could never have arranged. What once felt like loss becomes alignment. When the heart releases control, peace follows. Not the fragile peace that depends on perfect circumstances, but the unshakable calm that comes from knowing you are held even when nothing makes sense. Worship is not always about words or gestures. It is about trust. To let go is to say, without speaking, I believe you are enough. It is a quiet act of devotion that acknowledges divine sovereignty over your own will. There is a sacred stillness that comes after surrender. It is not the silence of defeat, but the calm of divine exchange. You give up your striving, and heaven gives you strength. You lay down your worry, and peace takes its place. Every time you release something you once feared to lose, you are reshaping your spirit into one that mirrors divine patience and trust. You begin to see that your weakness was never the problem. Your resistance was. Letting go teaches the soul that not everything broken must be fixed. Not every question must be answered. Not every wound must be explained. Some things are meant to be handed over to the mystery that is God's timing. When you can rest in that truth, you have entered worship deeper than words can reach. To let go is not to fall. It is to be caught. It is to find that divine grace was waiting for you all along, just beyond the edge of your control. Heaven's silence often hides divine preparation. There are seasons in life when prayers seem to disappear into the void, when every plea is met with stillness, and every question hangs unanswered in the air. It is in those moments that the human heart begins to doubt. We wonder if God has turned his face away, or if we have somehow been forgotten. Yet the silence of heaven is not neglect. It is nurture. What feels like absence is often activity beyond the reach of our perception. The quiet is not punishment. It is preparation. The greatest works of God are rarely born in noise. Creation itself began with silence before the command, "Let there be light." Between promise and fulfillment, there is always a pause, and in that pause, heaven works unseen. Our impatience makes us think nothing is happening, but in truth, everything is happening. Just not where our eyes can see. Faith must learn to live in that unseen space, trusting that the silence of God does not mean the stillness of his hand. When heaven is silent, the soul is forced to listen differently. It learns to hear through stillness, to sense rather than to see, to trust rather than to touch. Silence strips away the noise of our demands and reveals what kind of faith we truly have. Many believe when prayers are answered quickly, but real faith is born in the waiting. It is in the long stretches of quiet that our roots grow deep, anchoring us to truth instead of emotion. Silence becomes the furnace in which trust is refined. The divine often hides its preparation behind what looks like delay. God does not move according to human urgency. He moves according to eternal order. The silence between his promise and his action is the space where everything necessary is aligned. We think he is doing nothing, yet he is arranging hearts, opening unseen doors, and shaping circumstances so that when the answer finally arrives, it fits perfectly into the story he has written. If he gave what you asked for too soon, it would become a burden instead of a blessing. The silence ensures your readiness matches his timing. We are conditioned to believe that love must always speak, that care must always be visible, that guidance must always be obvious. But heaven's love is often revealed through restraint. A parent who always intervenes never allows the child to grow. In the same way, divine silence matures the soul. It teaches us to stand in the unknown without collapsing, to believe without proof, to keep walking even when the path fades before our eyes. The silence of heaven is not indifference. It is trust. It means God believes your faith can hold without constant reassurance. In those quiet stretches, heaven is also doing a deeper work within you. The silence exposes motives, reveals attachments, and purifies desires. It burns away the noise of ego, the impatience of self-will, and the illusion that control belongs to you. When God seems quiet, He is often shaping your spirit into something stronger than your circumstances. You begin to shift from asking, "Why aren't you answering me?" to saying, "What are you teaching me in this waiting?" That change in posture transforms silence from torment into communion. Many of the greatest biblical moments were preceded by silence. Before Jesus spoke life into Lazarus, there were days of mourning. Before the resurrection, there was a silent tomb. Before every dawn, there is the deep hush of night. The pattern is consistent. Stillness before glory. Heaven's silence is not the end of the story, but the sacred pause before the breakthrough. The quiet is where God gathers power, aligns purposes, and prepares revelation. When heaven hides its voice, it is not because it has stopped speaking, but because it is speaking in a language deeper than words. The silence becomes an invitation to trust what has already been spoken. Sometimes God does not repeat Himself because His last word is still true. The silence is a reminder to return to what you already know, rather than demand something new. Faith is not built on constant instruction, but on the endurance to believe in the dark what you heard in the light. Divine preparation requires concealment. Just as a seed must be buried before it grows, so too must certain blessings be hidden before they emerge. The soil looks empty, but life is forming beneath it. The silence of heaven is the soil of miracles. You do not see the roots growing, but they are anchoring deeply, so that when the fruit appears, it will endure. Impatience digs up what God is still planting. Those who can remain still in silence are the ones who see the fullness of the harvest. Heaven's silence tests and transforms, but it also protects. Sometimes you are kept waiting because what you ask for too soon would harm you. Sometimes the answer is delayed because other hearts involved are not yet ready. Sometimes the silence is mercy in disguise. The absence of immediate answers shields you from outcomes you cannot yet handle. When heaven is quiet, it is not withholding, it is safeguarding. To live through divine silence requires a steady heart, one anchored in trust rather than understanding. It is in that sacred quiet that you discover the difference between hearing God and knowing Him. When you no longer need constant affirmation to believe in His presence, you have entered a deeper faith. The silence is not a void, it is the breath of preparation before divine manifestation. Heaven hides not to withhold, but to complete what only silence can make perfect. Surrender is the bridge between exhaustion and peace. It is the sacred crossing every soul must take when its strength runs dry and its striving brings no fruit. At first, surrender feels like defeat, as though you are laying down your weapons in a battle you should have won. But over time, it reveals itself as something far greater. It is not losing, but finally aligning with a power beyond your own. Exhaustion is not the enemy. It is the messenger that tells you the human effort has reached its limit, and now heaven must take over. We live in a world that glorifies resilience, that teaches us to keep pushing long after our hearts are empty. To rest is seen as weakness, to pause as failure. But spiritual strength does not grow from constant motion, it is born in stillness. Peace is not found by pushing through the storm, but by yielding to the one who commands it. The bridge from exhaustion to peace is not built by more effort. It is crossed by release. Surrender is not the moment you give up. It is the moment you stop resisting divine order. When you reach the edge of your endurance, when nothing seems to respond to your will, surrender becomes the only honest response left. You realize that all the fixing, planning, and worrying have led you to the same still point where God was waiting all along. It is there, in that moment of release, that peace begins to flow, not from your success, but from your surrender. True peace is not found in getting what you want, but in trusting that what comes is what you need. The human soul was never designed to carry every burden. When you take on the weight of control, you step outside the rhythm of grace. You try to play the role of creator, forgetting that you were made to depend, not to dominate. Surrender returns you to your rightful place. It restores balance between divine will and human effort. When you finally let go of trying to hold everything together, you discover that nothing essential was ever falling apart. The universe has always been upheld by hands stronger than yours. Exhaustion is often the result of misplaced faith. You trust your own strength more than divine wisdom, your own timing more than divine rhythm. You work until your body aches and your mind grows numb, believing that peace will come when the task is done. But peace does not come at the end of effort. It comes at the end of resistance. It arrives the moment you stop striving against what is and start trusting what will be. Surrender is not the path of the weak. It is the secret strength of those who understand that control is an illusion. There is beauty in the breaking point. When your heart can no longer hold its own plans, it finally opens wide enough for God to pour something new inside. That emptiness you feel is not a void. It is a vessel being cleared for peace. The bridge from exhaustion to peace cannot be crossed while your hands are full of plans. You must release them, one by one, until the only thing you are holding is trust. It is in that open, handed posture that heaven meets you. Surrender teaches humility. It reminds you that you are a participant in the story, not the author. It calls you to rest in what you do not understand, to find calm even when the outcome is uncertain. The world will tell you to fight for control, to keep trying until the door opens. But heaven sometimes closes doors not to punish you, but to protect you from the path that would have drained your soul completely. Peace is found not in forcing doors open, but in trusting the ones that close. There is a quiet dignity in surrender. It does not come with applause or recognition. It often looks like sitting in stillness while others rush past. It is the courage to stop when everything around you demands you to keep moving. But that stillness is holy. It is in the pause that your spirit realigns with the divine. The noise of effort fades, and the gentle whisper of peace becomes audible again. You realize that the strength you were searching for was never in striving. It was waiting on the other side of surrender. The journey from exhaustion to peace is not a leap, it is a letting go. Each release of control, of fear, of expectation becomes a step across the bridge. The more you loosen your grip, the lighter you become, until eventually you are carried by grace instead of driven by strain. Peace is not found when circumstances change, but when your posture toward them does. You may still walk through storms, but you walk differently, unburdened, unafraid, and unhurried. Surrender does not erase struggle, it redeems it. It transforms exhaustion into trust and worry into worship. It does not mean life will be free of challenge, but it means the challenges no longer own you. When you live surrendered, you begin to feel peace even before the outcome appears. You realize that your safety was never in control, but in connection. That divine bridge, built of trust and letting go, is the passage every weary soul must find. It stands quietly between striving and serenity, waiting for those who are finally ready to cross. You are not being abandoned. You are being invited to trust. There are moments in life when everything familiar seems to fade, when prayers go unanswered, and silence becomes your only companion. It feels as though heaven has turned away, as though you have been left alone in a world too heavy to bear. Yet this is not abandonment, it is invitation. The absence you feel is not the absence of God. It is the space where faith is asked to grow. The divine withdraws the sense of nearness, not to punish, but to deepen your capacity to trust what cannot be seen. Trust is not born in moments of clarity, but in the fog of uncertainty. It is easy to believe when the path is lit, when the blessings are visible, and when every step feels affirmed. But the truest faith is forged in the unseen, when every external sign of support seems to vanish. The silence of God does not mean his departure. It is his way of teaching you to rely not on feelings, but on truth. Trust does not ask for proof. It rests in promise. It whispers, even in the darkness, that divine presence remains constant, even when your senses cannot detect it. Abandonment and invitation often feel the same at first. Both come with emptiness, both with uncertainty, both with tears. The difference lies in what follows. Abandonment leaves you hollow, but divine invitation expands you. When heaven seems distant, it is often drawing you closer, asking you to walk by faith instead of sight. What feels like distance is sometimes God giving you space to step forward on your own, to discover that his strength has already been placed within you. The same silence that once frightened you becomes the echo that leads you deeper into trust. God does not build faith in comfort. He builds it in tension, in waiting, in the places where your understanding ends. Trust is not learned through explanations, but through endurance. When nothing makes sense, when answers refuse to come, when prayers seem unanswered, you are standing at the threshold of transformation. Heaven is not ignoring you. It is shaping you. You are being refined, stretched, and taught to depend on something eternal rather than temporary reassurance. The absence you feel is the molding of your spirit into strength. Every soul that has walked deeply with God has passed through seasons of perceived abandonment. Moses wandered in silence before the voice spoke from the burning bush. David cried out from the wilderness, asking why his soul was forgotten. Even Christ himself, upon the cross, felt the weight of divine silence. Yet in each of those moments, what seemed like absence was the preparation for revelation. Heaven hides only to reveal more fully. The darkness does not mean you have been forsaken. It means light is being prepared to break in a way your heart has not yet imagined. You are not being left alone. You are being trusted with the silence. When God withholds his voice, it is often a sign that he believes your faith can hold without constant reassurance. Parents step back as children learn to walk, not because they love them less, but because they trust their growth. In the same way, divine distance is proof of divine confidence. Heaven steps back to let your faith step forward. You are not being punished. You are being proven capable of standing in the unseen. Trust grows in the soil of uncertainty. It stretches in the moments when you have no choice but to lean on what you cannot see. Faith is not a feeling to be maintained. It is a choice repeated daily in the face of doubt. To trust God when everything is clear is understanding. To trust him when everything is silent, that is worship. The invitation to trust is not glamorous. It is often hidden in disappointment, in delay, in unanswered prayer. But those are the very spaces where divine intimacy is born. When you are invited to trust, it means heaven is asking you to stop searching for proof and start resting in promise. It means you are being called into a relationship deeper than dependence on signs. Trust is the courage to believe that even the silence is holy, that even the unanswered prayer is not wasted. The very things that make you question God are often the same things that will reveal Him most clearly once you endure them. This invitation requires courage because it comes without guarantees. It asks you to believe without evidence, to keep walking when you cannot see the road. But in that unseen journey, you begin to realize that the absence of visible support does not mean the absence of divine guidance. The strength that keeps you moving, the peace that quietly sustains you, the whisper that tells you to keep going. These are all the hidden signs that you are not alone. You are not being abandoned. You are being entrusted. Heaven is shaping your faith into something unshakable. It is drawing you beyond dependency into true intimacy, beyond fear into faith, beyond sight into surrender. When everything feels uncertain, that is the moment you are closest to divine truth, because trust cannot live in clarity. It lives in mystery. You are being invited to step into that mystery, to walk not by proof but by presence, to believe that even in silence, heaven is still speaking your name.